I knew I was finished the moment Roger's eyes flickered past me to the next agenda item. 3 years of 80-hour weeks. 3 years of missed birthdays, canceled vacations, and cold dinners in empty offices, all dismissed with a corporate smile and a PowerPoint slide labeled budget adjustments. As you can see, despite Mia's cost-saving initiatives, we're implementing across-the-board bonus reductions. Your department is lucky to still exist. The CFO's voice carried that familiar, condescending edge as he looked directly at me. Questions? My throat closed around unspoken words as 27 pairs of eyes turned toward me. The woman who'd pulled their company from the brink of bankruptcy with $3.8 million in savings sat silent, nodding professionally like this was all reasonable. Like I hadn't just been robbed in broad daylight. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the conference table. I simply pulled out my phone under the table and sent the email I'd drafted 3 days ago when I first heard rumors of the bonus cuts. Subject line, activation protocol, sunrise. My finger hovered for just a second before pressing send. Roger continued his presentation as my future changed forever. Hey, I'm Mia Kendrick, 32, financial operations specialist, and apparently the world's biggest corporate doormat, or so they thought. Look, before I continue this absolute dumpster fire of a story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments, and seriously, hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to share is the kind of corporate revenge story that will make you check your own work emails differently. I never planned to take down half a company. That wasn't who I was raised to be. Mom was a kindergarten teacher for 30 years. Dad worked the same assembly line until retirement. Honest work for honest pay might as well have been tattooed across our family crest. I believed in it too, right up until I learned exactly what Vertex Solutions thought my honest work was worth. When I joined Vertex 3 years ago, they were already struggling, though the executive floor with its Italian furniture and daily catered lunches didn't show it. I was hired as a mid-level financial operations manager, brought in specifically to trim fat from our operational expenses. Within 6 months, I'd identified nearly $800,000 in unnecessary software subscriptions, service contracts with companies that no longer existed, and equipment leases for machines sitting unused in storage. My boss at the time, Franklin, was thrilled. The executive team took me to dinner. Roger, the CFO, a tall, immaculately dressed man with the emotional capacity of a spreadsheet, actually smiled at me. "You've got quite an eye for efficiency, Mia," he'd said, swirling expensive whiskey in a crystal glass. "We need more people who understand the bottom line." I preened under that validation like a starving person offered crumbs. That's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. Even the smallest recognition feels like a feast. When the pandemic hit, Vertex hemorrhaged clients. While other executives panicked, I saw opportunity. I created a financial triage system, renegotiating every major vendor contract, identifying tax incentives the company had missed, and restructuring our entire accounts receivable process. 16-hour days became my norm. My boyfriend left after I missed our anniversary dinner because I was finalizing a proposal that would save the company $1.2 million annually. "The job will always take whatever you give it, Mia," he said, packing his things, "but it will never love you back." I should have listened. Instead, I worked harder. By the 18-month mark, I had saved Vertex approximately $3.8 million, nearly 30% of our annual operating budget. The company avoided layoffs when our competitors were gutting staff. Roger presented my strategies to the board as finance department initiatives without mentioning my name. I told myself it didn't matter who got credit as long as jobs were saved. What a fucking idiot I was. Last month, I overheard Roger in the executive bathroom, the one I wasn't supposed to use but did anyway because the women's room on our floor was perpetually out of order. He was on the phone, laughing. The board approved the executive compensation package, he said to whoever was on the line. No, they bought the whole austerity measures pitch. We're announcing departmental budget cuts next week. But don't worry, our bonuses are locked in. I'm thinking Tuscany this year, not just the Hamptons. I froze in the stall, toilet paper suspended midair. The company wasn't struggling anymore. They were cutting our budgets. my budget to inflate executive bonuses. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I used my system's access to look at the compensation structure. What I found made me physically ill. My initiatives had saved the company $3.8 million, and the executive team had allocated themselves $2.9 million in bonuses. My own bonus, which I'd been counting on to finally put a down payment on a house, was being cut from the promised $60,000 to $8,000. For the next week, I smiled through meetings. I collaborated on projects. I made coffee runs for my team. And every night, I went home and methodically documented everything. Every client relationship I'd personally salvaged. Every system backdoor I discovered while implementing cost-saving measures. Every password and access code that technically should have been changed but never was, because IT was too understaffed after their budget optimization. Every executive meeting note that contradicted what employees were told. I created 3 secure drives, one with copies of all communication proving my contributions, one with detailed client information including personal preferences and contract vulnerabilities, and one with system access documentation that would make any security officer faint. The 3rd drive wasn't just passwords. It was a catalog of every shortcut, every overlooked security protocol, every backdoor that allowed our systems to function despite years of patchwork updates. Information worth millions to competitors, or worse, hackers. I wasn't planning to use any of it. Not yet. This was insurance, I told myself. Protection. Then came the meeting. Budget cuts. Department lucky to exist. Roger's eyes sliding past me to the next agenda item. The email I sent during that meeting was to my personal attorney, a woman I'd gone to college with who specialized in whistleblower protections and employment law. Everything I'd documented, legally obtained through my legitimate work access, was now in her secured server. As the meeting ended, Roger caught my elbow. Mia, I hope you understand these decisions aren't personal. Everyone needs to tighten their belts. I looked at his wrist where a new Patek Philippe gleamed. A $95,000 watch I recognized from the catalog my ex used to browse. Just for fun. Of course, I said with a plastic smile. We're all in this together. That afternoon, I cleared my desk methodically. Not everything. That would raise alarms. Just personal items. Gradually, over hours, the framed photo of my parents. The stress ball shaped like Jupiter, the spare phone charger. My desk looked normal, just slightly more minimalist. At 6:12 p.m., I submitted my resignation letter effective immediately. Citing personal reasons, I blind copied my attorney. By 6:14 p.m., my company access was revoked. Standard protocol. By 6:20 p.m., Roger was calling my cell. I didn't answer. At 6:45 p.m., I received an email from HR requesting an exit interview and reminding me of my non-compete clause. At 8:30 p.m., I was sitting in my attorney's office as she reviewed my documentation. They really had no idea what you were doing? She asked, scrolling through spreadsheets of my achievements. These savings are extraordinary. They knew I was cutting costs, I said. They just didn't care how, as long as the numbers worked. And you're certain about these executive bonuses? I showed her the screenshots. Her eyebrows nearly hit her hairline. Mia, this isn't just unfair. There are potential SEC implications here. The board was misled about company finances if what you're showing me is accurate. I hadn't even considered that angle. I was just hurt, betrayed, angry. But sitting in that office, watching a legal professional assess what I'd found, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about my bonus anymore. This was about a systemic corruption that harmed everyone, the employees who were underpaid, the clients who were overcharged, the shareholders who were misled. What do you want to do with this? She asked finally. For the first time in 3 years, I allowed myself to consider what I actually wanted, not what would best serve Vertex. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I want what I've earned, I said simply, and I want them to never do this to anyone else. The plan we formulated wasn't flashy. It wouldn't make headlines or go viral, but it would work, and it would hurt exactly the people who deserved it. Step 1 happened the next morning. I reached out to Darius Johnson, our biggest client, under the guise of saying goodbye. Darius and I had developed a genuine friendship over years of solving his company's problems. Problems that Vertex often created, but that I cleaned up. You're leaving? After everything you've done for them? His disbelief was evident even over the phone. Mia, no offense, but Vertex is nothing without you. Who's handling our account now? They haven't said, I replied truthfully. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to work together. There was a pause. Let's have coffee next week, he said finally, to properly say goodbye. I agreed, knowing exactly what would happen at that coffee meeting. Step 2 was more delicate. I contacted 5 key team members, all underpaid, all brilliant, all essential to Vertex's operations, and informed them I'd be starting a consulting practice. No offers, no solicitation, just information. 3 of them immediately asked if I was hiring. Step 3 was the most satisfying. Through my attorney, I sent a formal letter to the Vertex Board of Directors outlining specific financial discrepancies between what they had been told about the company's financial health and what the executive team was actually doing. I included evidence of my contributions, the subsequent executive bonus structure, and the misleading budget cuts narrative. I made no demands. I simply provided information as a recently departed employee, concerned about corporate governance. Then I waited. It only took 2 days for the first domino to fall. Roger called, his voice strained. Mia, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We'd like to discuss your resignation. I'm sorry, who is this? I asked, though I knew perfectly well. His laugh was nervous. It's Roger Daniels, Mia, from Vertex. Look, the board has some questions about your departure, and frankly, we'd like to revisit your compensation package. How interesting, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I was under the impression that everyone needs to tighten their belts. Budget cuts, right? The silence told me everything I needed to know. I'm busy at the moment, Roger. My attorney will be happy to schedule a meeting if you'd like to discuss anything further. I hung up before he could respond. What Roger didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already secured meetings with 3 of Vertex's competitors. Not to leak information or violate any agreements, but to discuss potential consulting opportunities where my cost-saving expertise might be valued appropriately. What followed was the strangest 2 weeks of my professional life. I rented a small office space downtown, created a simple website, and started reaching out to industry contacts, all perfectly legal activities that violated no non-compete clauses. I didn't poach clients. I didn't need to. The coffee meeting with Darius happened at a small cafe 3 blocks from the Vertex building. Intentionally close, I arrived early, ordering a simple black coffee while watching the door. When Darius walked in tall, commanding, with the confident stride of someone who controlled a $50 million annual budget, I noticed he wasn't alone. Victor Chen, Vertex's VP of Client Relations, trailed behind him like an anxious shadow. Mia, Darius embraced me warmly while Victor stood awkwardly to the side. And look who I ran into on my way here. What a coincidence. The tight smile on Victor's face told me exactly how much of a coincidence it wasn't. Victor, I nodded professionally. Settling in with the Darius Johnson account? Actually, Darius interrupted. That's partly why I asked Victor to join us. Vertex has informed me they're restructuring their client management team. Apparently, some of the accounts I've been discussing with you over the past year aren't in their records. I took a slow sip of coffee, maintaining eye contact with Victor. How strange. Victor cleared his throat. There seems to be some missing documentation. Transition issues. I'm sure we can sort it out. What Victor meant was that I had been handling client concerns directly, resolving issues before they became formal complaints, managing relationships through personal connections, rather than the clunky CRM system that no one fully understood how to use. All of this had been celebrated when it saved accounts. Now, it was a liability. Darius, I said calmly, I documented everything in monthly reports to management. I'm sure Victor has access to those. Victor's slight flinch confirmed what I suspected. They hadn't bothered to read my detailed reports. They'd taken the results without understanding the process. Darius turned to Victor. I need to speak with Mia privately. Business matters. Victor started to protest, but seemed to think better of it. After he left, Darius leaned forward. They don't have a clue how to manage our account, do they? I chose my words carefully. Vertex has many talented people, but none who understand our specific needs like you do. He slid a business card across the table. My CFO wants to meet with you. Consulting basis. We're reviewing all our vendor relationships next quarter. I pocketed the card without comment. We both knew what it meant. By the end of that week, 3 more major clients had reached out. I didn't solicit any of them. I didn't have to. The moment these sophisticated business leaders heard I was gone, they connected the dots themselves. Meanwhile, Vertex was unraveling from the inside. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from former colleagues. They can't find the Johnson contract addendum. Roger is asking where you kept the vendor negotiation templates. It says there's no documentation for the billing system modifications you made. I responded to each with polite variations of, I documented everything in the shared drive, or that information should be in my monthly reports. All true statements. I had documented everything meticulously, comprehensively, and in locations exactly where company policy dictated they should be. The problem wasn't missing documentation. The problem was that no one had ever bothered to read it. 7 days after my departure, my attorney called. The board wants a meeting. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. On what terms? I asked, my heart suddenly racing. Their initial position was to threaten legal action for theft of company information. I sent them the email trail showing everything you documented was done through proper channels and reported to management. They've pivoted to wanting to discuss a consulting arrangement. I laughed without humor. They want to hire me back as a consultant at 4 times your previous salary, plus the full bonus you were originally promised. For a moment, vindication washed through me. They finally recognized my value, but the feeling quickly soured into something harder, colder. I'm not interested. My attorney paused. Mia, that's a significant offer. It's hush money, I replied. They don't want me back. They want my silence. Well, there's something else. The board has called an emergency session to review executive compensation. 2 board members have requested full disclosure of the savings initiatives you implemented and how the executive team reported them. That was interesting. Not sufficient, but interesting. I'll meet with them, I decided, but not at Vertex. They can come to my office. The look on Roger's face when he walked into my small but tasteful new office space the next morning was worth every penny of the rent. He was flanked by Patricia Winters, Vertex's chief legal officer, and Eleanor Grayson, the board chairwoman, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who I'd only seen in company-wide meetings. Ms. Kendrick, Eleanor began before the others could speak. I appreciate you taking this meeting. Of course, I replied, remaining seated behind my desk. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't engage in small talk. Power moves I'd learned from watching men like Roger for years. We have some concerns about your departure, Patricia stated, placing a folder on my desk, particularly regarding company information. I didn't touch the folder. My attorney, seated beside me, spoke instead. My client has violated no confidentiality agreements. All documentation she compiled was created in the normal course of her duties and properly stored in company systems. Roger's jaw tightened. The issue isn't what she documented, but how she's using that information. And how exactly am I using it, Roger? I asked, looking directly at him for the first time. He faltered. Clients are calling, asking questions, threatening to review their contracts. Have I contacted your clients? You met with Darius Johnson. He invited me for coffee to say goodbye. Am I not allowed to have coffee with a friend? Eleanor raised her hand slightly, cutting off Roger's response. Miss Kendrick, let's be frank. You are an exceptional asset to Vertex. Your departure has created difficulties. We'd like to discuss your return. I smiled politely. I'm not interested in returning to Vertex. Perhaps as a consultant, she pressed, with appropriate compensation. What would appropriate compensation look like in your view? I asked. Roger interjected. We're prepared to offer a consulting contract at $15,000 per month for 6 months, plus your full original bonus of $60,000. The number was insultingly precise. They'd calculated exactly how much they thought it would take to buy me off, without disrupting their precious executive bonus structure. That's generous, I said, watching relief flash across Roger's face before I continued, but insufficient. Patricia leaned forward. What would be sufficient, Ms. Kendrick? I looked at each of them in turn before speaking. Full disclosure to all employees about the actual state of company finances. Cancellation of the executive bonus program until employee bonuses are restored to promised levels. A comprehensive review of gender-based pay disparities across the organization, and a public acknowledgement of my contributions to the company's financial recovery. Roger actually laughed. That's not a negotiation. That's a hostile takeover. No, Roger, I replied calmly. A hostile takeover would be me accepting positions with North Star Solutions, Vanguard Tech, and Meridian Group, all of whom have approached me, and bringing my intimate knowledge of Vertex's operational weaknesses to your 3 biggest competitors. The room went silent. You signed a non-compete, Patricia reminded me quietly. My attorney smiled, which only prevents her from working for competitors within a 50-mile radius for 6 months if she receives her contractually guaranteed severance and bonus. Since Vertex failed to honor the bonus commitment, the non-compete is unenforceable. Basic contract law. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied me. What exactly do you want, Ms. Kendrick? Justice, I replied simply. Not just for me. For everyone at Vertex who created value only to have it redirected to executive pockets. Roger stood abruptly. This is absurd. She's trying to dictate company policy. She has no standing. Sit down, Roger, Eleanor said, her voice steel beneath silk. She turned back to me. The board was not fully informed about how the savings you generated were being allocated. That is being addressed separately. A diplomatic way of saying Roger and his executive team were in serious trouble. I appreciate that, I said, but my terms remain the same. They left without an agreement, but I knew I'd won. The board had seen the documentation. They understood what had happened. The only question was how they would handle it. The answer came 3 days later in the form of a company-wide email that a former colleague forwarded to me. Effective immediately, Roger Daniels will be stepping down as CFO to pursue other opportunities. An internal audit of financial reporting practices has been initiated. The previously announced budget cuts have been suspended pending this review. The board extends its sincere appreciation to all employees whose hard work and dedication have contributed to Vertex's financial recovery, particularly those in financial operations. There was no mention of my name. I hadn't expected there to be. But every person at that company knew exactly who had brought this reckoning. That same day, I received a personal email from Eleanor Grayson requesting another meeting, this time, just the 2 of us. We met at a restaurant far from both Vertex and my new office. Eleanor didn't waste time on pleasantries. The board has accepted all your terms, with one modification, she said, placing a document between us. Rather than a public acknowledgement, we're prepared to offer a private settlement with a non-disparagement clause that works both ways. You don't discuss the circumstances of your departure. We don't minimize your contributions if contacted for references. I reviewed the document. The financial terms were substantial, 3 times what Roger had offered. And the employee bonuses? I asked. Being restored next quarter, funded by the cancellation of executive bonuses. We're also implementing a complete audit of compensation structures across all departments. I nodded slowly. And Roger? Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. Roger is no longer with the company in any capacity. The board is cooperating with an external financial audit that may have additional consequences for him and several other executives. Translation: Roger might be facing more than just unemployment. I signed the agreement, not for the money, though it was significant. I signed because they had met my real demands, the ones that mattered for all the people still working at Vertex who deserved better than what Roger and his team had done. Within a month, my consulting business was thriving. I specialized in ethical cost-saving strategies and transparent financial operations. 3 former Vertex employees now worked for me, including Larissa from accounting, who'd been at the company for 15 years and knew where all the real skeletons were buried. Darius Johnson's company became my biggest client. Vertex kept their contract with him. My goal had never been to destroy the company, but he insisted that I review all their processes and pricing. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months after leaving Vertex, I received a text from my old assistant, Sophie. "You won't believe this. They're renaming the financial operations methodology you created. It's now officially the Kendrick Protocol in the company handbook." I smiled at my phone. It wasn't a public acknowledgement, but it was something more lasting. That night, I sat on my balcony, the balcony of the condo I'd purchased, with my settlement and consulting income, and finally felt the tight knot that had lived in my chest for months begin to unravel. I didn't take down Vertex. I never wanted to. The company itself wasn't the villain. It was the culture of extraction created by people who saw employee value as something to be harvested rather than cultivated. Those people were gone now, or at least significantly diminished in power. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Another potential client. My calendar for the next month was already full, but I found myself smiling as I read their inquiry. "We've heard about your work with ethical cost management strategies. Our CFO specifically requested you by name. Life has a strange way of delivering exactly what you need, exactly when you've stopped desperately wanting it." The revenge I'd originally craved watching Roger and his team suffer, seeing Vertex struggle without me, had evolved into something more profound, a complete reclamation of my own value. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need them to hurt like I had hurt. What I needed was for the system to be corrected, for balance to be restored. And somehow, through the shock waves of my departure, that's exactly what happened. Roger never realized what I'd documented until it was too late. He never understood that my power wasn't in the client list or the system backdoors. It was in the meticulous record of my own worth that no corporate sleight of hand could erase. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying what hurt you. Sometimes it's building something new that would never have existed if they hadn't underestimated you so severely. They say success is the best revenge. They're wrong. The best revenge is growth becoming someone who no longer needs revenge at all. But I won't lie. Hearing that Roger had to sell his vacation home to cover legal fees, that didn't feel too bad either.